Nick fix it home. You know, it's so dark here. Yeah, it is. Oh, it's not
Great. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The second lecture of this morning is a demonstration of autosomal DNA success stories, and it'll be presented by myself, Maurice Gleeson, Emily Aulicino, and Captain Borges. So between the three of us, we'll give you our own perspective on successes that we have personally had with autosomal DNA in our family tree research. But let me just start off by recapping on what is autosomal DNA. There are three different types of DNA. The first type is Y DNA, and Y DNA follows the father's line all the way back to Africa 338,000 years ago. So it's a very, very good test for deep ancestry as well as recent ancestry. On the other side of the tree, we have the mitochondrial DNA, which goes all the way back on the mother's line, and that will take you back to Africa about 200,000 years ago. So again, very good test for deep ancestry, but also for recent ancestry as well. Now, we're not going to be talking about those two types of tests today, one on one extreme side of your family tree, the other on the other extreme side of your family tree. Instead, what we're going to talk about is the autosomal DNA test. And this test looks at all of your ancestral lines. So there are two major differences between autosomal DNA and the other two types of DNA. Autosomal DNA looks at all of your ancestral lines, not just one on either side of the family tree. And the other major difference is it only has a reach of about 7 generations at the most. That's about 200 to 250 years back from your date of birth. So that, in my case, that takes me back to around about 1750 or so. But it's very, very good for connecting you with genetic cousins with whom you share a common ancestor within the last 200 to 250 years. So for me, that's going to help me with my brick walls that are going to be around about 1800, 1750, that type of area, okay? So that's just a short introduction about the different types of DNA and the fact that today we're focusing on autosomal DNA. And I'm going to hand over to Emily, who's going to switch her microphone on, and Emily will tell you about autosomal DNA successes from her point of view. Emily.
Okay, basically I will ask you, how do you spell success? This is how I spell success, DNA. And I've had several. But success is basically, the term is defined as, an achievement, an accomplishment, whatever. But they're measured differently. Some people measure success in tiny little steps. So you have to understand that really success is in the eye of the beholder. We can have great successes, or just a little progress can be considered success. And we celebrate when there is any success. Finding the ancestors beyond the current brick wall, including relatives and adoptives, is success in DNA. Finding your correct lineage, verifying that cousins do or do not match, can be success. Determining which segments came from which ancestors can be done with the Family Finder test and is greatly successful. Finding new cousins and persons related to you who can help you with your research, success. These are some of the success stories in my particular family. I have a simple, I'll go through each one, but some were simple to do, some a little more difficult. So these are other ways that you have to negotiate using DNA. For my Simpson line, it was very simple. I had a woman who was listed on my results as a probable fourth cousin, but the relationship range, which you will see in Family Finder, was from 3 to 7 cousins. So it gives you a bit of a place where to look. We shared a list of fourth great-grandparents with the dates, with the locations. Her lineage had 8 surnames. that connected to my family in some way. Not directly, but in some way. Within 16 days, and of course it wasn't day and night work, it was just over this time when I had time to deal with it, we found our common ancestor, and we're really 6 cousins once removed. I added 3 more generations to my pedigree chart from her information. That's success. Breaking a brick wall. This is the part where we match. So our common ancestor was William Simpson, born in 1750 in North Carolina. And you can see I descend from one person and she descends from a sister of my direct line. Then there was the Gilmore family secrets. So if you do not want to find the truth, do not do a DNA test. I have a Gilmore second cousin that I grew up with and knew her personally. And she and her grandfather and my grandmother were siblings. When we tested, there was no match at all. We knew that both families had illegitimate children. My grandmother had a child before she was married to my grandfather, but my mother was the oldest child. So you go, maybe, can't be sure. We also knew in the family that her grandmother had one little illegitimate child before she had, while she was still married to her grandfather. So we tested people from different parts of our family to find out who's really the Gilmore. I am. Her grandmother got out twice. What was really interesting is she tested her uncle, who was on that illegitimate line, and tested somebody else from her father's line, who was on the illegitimate line, with the Y chromosome, and found out they had the same father. So with the 4 children, 2 from one father, 2 from another father. So I told her, I said, Shirley, at least your grandmother liked this guy. So anyway, they found the correct surname as well because they tested the Y DNA, and that was very helpful for that family. But she's still my cousin in my heart. So correcting your lineage is success. Now my story are basically a math move. You only have a 50-50 chance of matching 4th cousins. And I isolated my pedigree chart, so if I match this cousin and a stranger, I know where to look on my pedigree chart. I found a story in New York where my ancestors hung out, but I didn't match him. He was a 4th cousin. However, he matched another person who had the story line that I matched. So basically, when they came from Dundee to Scotland to Ireland, they went to Donaghadee and up to the harbour there. Then over in 1838, they came to the States, actually Canada, and then down to the States. So A equals B, B equals C. He's my cousin. It's just that 50% of the time you're not going to match your 4th cousins. But he matched another, and that's the only line where we can connect. So I know it's right. You're verifying indirectly, but that is success. The X chromosome in my open line. And by the way, if any of you see these names, come talk to me if they're in your pedigree. I matched a known cousin on my second cousin on my Gilmore Oregon line, and I used Blaine Bittinger's span chart, which I'll show you in a second, to determine which specific ancestor gave us the X chromosome. And in case some of you don't know, the males inherit the X differently than the females. So we discovered that ancestor on a particular DNA segment. And the success is knowing which ancestor provided the DNA. And that's what you can do with Family Finder. So this is how we did it. This is how the female inherits X chromosome. All the colors in pink, of course, are women. the blue is male. So I plotted my line on this chart in the section where I knew she came from, because I knew this person, but I still wanted to know which ancestor. So I'm Emily, my mother's Beverly, and I'm, of course, named after my grandmother, and goes back to Lowry and Mary. And I know she's a descendant from Lowry and Mary, but I didn't know who gave the DNA. Then I plotted Rebecca's, my second cousin. And as you can see, it has to be Mary, because she would not have received any DNA through Lowry. So Mary Open Gilmore gave us our X chromosome. That's because Lowry could not give his X to his son. He only gave her the Y. But the mother gave the son the X. Cruising the GenComs. You need to upload your GenCom. It's very helpful, very important. And I went through all the GenComs of all the matches on my family tree, family finder test, and I found several matches. So, first of all, we have the Williams and Miller and Sherrill line, and that's basically the one where my cousins married cousins. I found a fifth cousin once removed, just by comparing GenComs and having a lot of genealogy where I can trace back. My Canterbury line, I found 6 cousins and gave that person 4 more generations for her pedigree chart. Born, with and without an E, because I understand they're pretty prolific in some areas here. The 6th cousin once removed, and I gave her 3 generations to help her back. I've been doing genealogy since 1970, so I have a little bit. The Sherrill Simpson Perkins line, 6 cousins. And the reason those go back so much further is because my great-grandparents were first cousins. Therefore, I have more DNA. And that pushes the line back. My Lycan line, I found an indirect relationship, and we match on chromosomes, so I know there's a connection, but I haven't been able to figure out the exact person yet, which means there's probably a female somewhere who married a name that I don't recognize, or vice versa for my match. So we're still working on that one, but I have a good clue of where to look. This one I have to show you because, again, those cousins marrying cousins, and this is how we go back to that William Sherrill. My 6th cousin once removed, he matches through the direct lines. The red double line means marriage. So you can see how convoluted this is. We match at several locations because even though my great-grandparents were first cousins, the further you go back on that line, there's more cousins marrying cousins. And that happens if you live in the same area for a very long time. So that gives you an idea of how you need to track. But definitely success from posting your GenComs, so please do that. I encourage you to. Sweet success. Have you found your ancestors beyond your current brick walls? Now, there's always going to be brick walls, correct? Have you found new cousins and persons with whom you relate that can help you in your research? Have you found your birth parents, or at least the biological surname, if you've been adopted or there's a name change? Have you determined who is not related to you, so you focus on branches of a particular surname? No? Then you need a DNA test. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thanks very much, Emily. Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how autosomal DNA has provided a success in my family tree, and I'd like to illustrate it by talking about the mystery of the wedding memento. Now, this is the story of Ruby Kathleen Gleeson. And a couple of years ago, my dad was going through his grandfather's papers, and a bookmark fell out. Well, it looked like a bookmark, so he picked it up. It wasn't a bookmark at all, it was a wedding memento. And if you can barely read it here, it says, David Patterson, Ruby K. Gleeson, married at Targominda the 23rd of March, 1893. There's a nice little daffodil there. And he said, who the heck is Ruby K. Gleeson? We don't have any Ruby in our family. So we asked our first cousin, do you know if there's a Ruby in the family? She said, Ruby? There's no Ruby in our family. She sounds like a table dancer. So she was about to be relegated to the shoebox of obscurity until I said, look, I'm going to take a little closer look at this. And the first thing I did was I looked for Targominda. And it's right in the middle of the Australian desert, surrounded by man-eating koalas and poisonous snakes, my personal favourite shacks with frickin' lasers. So what the heck was Ruby K. Gleeson getting married in the middle of the Australian desert, and how did her wedding memento end up in my great-grandfather's papers in Dublin? So I sent off for the wedding certificate, the marriage certificate for Ruby, and it turned out that her name was Ruby Kathleen, and her parents were John and Anne Gleeson. And I thought, fantastic, because my great-great-grandparents are John and Anne Gleeson. They must be the same people, because after all, how many John Gleesons can there be? Well, actually, Anne Gleeson had a brother called John Gleeson, and they had a sister called Catherine Gleeson, who married a John Gleeson. So there were 3 John Gleesons in the same family. So I looked a little bit further, and I found Ruby Kathleen's death certificate, as well as her marriage certificate. She was born in Longstone, and I thought that's fantastic, because my great-grandfather was born in Longstone, and all of his siblings were born in the neighbouring townlands. So that was a tantalising parallel between the 2 stories. She put down her father as a hotel keeper on her marriage certificate, and as a farmer on her death certificate. And I think that's because she actually married somebody who ran a hotel, and she wanted to give the impression that she knew what she was doing when he took her on. My John Gleeson was a labourer who never set foot in a hotel. She was born around about 1872, 1869, and the siblings of my great-grandfather were born around about the same time. And we had a Catherine, a Bridget, and a Winifred. Catherine could have become Kathleen, possibly. We know from the death certificate that Ruby Kathleen moved to Australia in 1886, and that kind of corresponded with the death of my great-great-grandfather, her putative father. The father dies, the family's a little bit destitute, so the children have to make their own way. It kind of makes sense. We also had family lore that 2 of the siblings headed off to Australia, and the daughter of Winifred, is what we heard, was a concert pianist or an accomplished singer. And after 2 years, I put all this information up on Genes Reunited, and the tree sat up there for 2 years, and occasionally I would go back and check, and after 2 years I managed to track the grandson of Ruby Kathleen Gleeson. And he was in his 80s, and we established an email conversation, and after a couple of months he agreed to do an autosomal DNA test. So I paid for it, and it went off to Australia, and a couple of months later the results came back. And I'll tell you about those in a second. But he was able to give some extra information about Ruby Kathleen, the fact that she went to stay with an uncle and aunt in Sydney, the fact that she had a brother who was a baseball player, who gave them a watch engraved on the back, which they cannot find. So there's a lot of useful additional information, but the key one was that Ruby Kathleen had a daughter who was an accomplished musician and excelled at the violin. Is this the same person? So many tantalizing parallels between what we knew from our family lore and what they in Australia knew from their family lore. So we did a DNA test. Here's a picture of Ruby Kathleen. Here's a picture of my great-grandfather. Now, with the autosomal DNA test, if you look at siblings, they share around about 50% of their DNA in common. First cousins will share on average 12.5%, second cousins 3.125%. And these are group averages. If you take a large group of people, this is the kind of average that you'll get. But there will be a range around that average. So for second cousins, we're looking for an average of 3% with a range of 1.3 to 4.3%. Well, the results came back, And Dad and Alan matched 2.6% of their DNA. It was exactly the same. They had 2.6% of their DNA in common, and my DNA was 1.5%. I shared 1.5% of my DNA with Alan. And this confirmed that we were definitely genetically related, and because of the percentage of DNA that we shared, the computer estimated that the likely relationship was second cousins, which was exactly what we predicted from the documentary evidence. So again, it's not 100% proof, but it's very, very strong proof. Whereas previously we only had family lore that was tantalizingly similar, now we actually had genetic proof that showed that we are definitely related, and the most likely explanation is second cousins. So, what has autosomal DNA testing told us? Dad and Alan are definitely genetically related. It's confirmed a suspected relationship with 99% probability, but many unanswered questions remain, and for that, the DNA has helped focus our research. Which of the three sisters became Ruby Kathleen? Or was there another sister that we're not aware of? Ruby Kathleen, however, has been saved from the shoebox of obscurity. She will never end up in a shoebox under the bed because she's part of our family now, and we have new cousins in Australia, they have new cousins in Ireland, and that is what DNA has done with this particular story within the family. It's helped break through a brick wall and opened up new avenues of research which previously we may not have thought of doing. So that's one story from the family. I'd like to also talk a little bit about DNA adoption, which are a group in the US who've done some fantastic work on reconnecting adoptees with their biological families. And they have a variety of tools and utilities on this website, but more importantly, they have an army of volunteers that are dedicating themselves to reconnecting adoptees with their biological families. And if you do, this is Richard Hill, and he's produced a book called Finding Family, and he gives a wonderful account of his journey towards finding his biological father. So I would certainly recommend that book. It's a real page turner. You can read it in one sitting. And he also has a video on YouTube which you can look at. There's also another video here of somebody reuniting with their father after 50 years. And I couldn't show it here today because I'd be in buckets of tears otherwise. You don't want to see a grown man cry. So that is Richard Hill's book. I received this email from one of my matches on Family Finder last year. And it says, unlike people who are doing their tree out of interest, we have a specific purpose, which is to find out who my mother's birth parents are. Only this year, we received a letter from my grandmother, which she had written in 1962, which a relative in Australia had kept all these years. She also sent photographs of my mother's mother. So at the age of 84, she finally got to see what her mother looked like. You never know what you will find. And this is a picture of her mother. So what's it like at the age of 84 to see your mother for the first time? Incredible, absolutely incredible. Probably a huge mix of emotions. But I think the final word that she said in that email, you never know what you will find, is so relevant. You know, unless you actually do the test, you will never know what you would have found. So this is a picture of Pauline May Cartwright. My match has asked me to ask you guys, do you know her family? Do you know the mother, her brother Eric Godfrey Cartwright, the mother Phyllis Ina Cartwright? This is the mother here, Phyllis Ina Cartwright, who came from London. We are still working together to try and solve this mystery, but I am one of her closest matches. So the solution to the mystery of her brick wall lies within my family tree. So this is going to be an ongoing subject for research. And that is really all I have to say about autosomal DNA. And I'm going to pass over now to Katherine, who will tell you about autosomal DNA success stories in her own particular family tree research.
Great, thank you, Maurice. Okay, so mine's a little differently, and it's more talking and charts, but it's a different angle that I want to present to you as far as testing with family tree DNA. Family tree DNA has what's called projects, where volunteers like myself and Maurice and Emily and several of the others out here and the people over in the stands we're genealogists who are also volunteer project administrators. We do not get paid for this, but the reason that we do this is not only for a love of it and discovery, but we want to help others to do it too. So in family tree DNA, they give you a system of projects which they originally started with surname projects, and then they expanded to geographical projects, like they have projects for, Maurice and I are co-administrators on Ireland Mitochondrial Project. And you also have a Caribbean one too. And so after they allowed the geographical projects, and they came out with the autosomal DNA testing in 2010, many project administrators like myself started allowing people to add their results to our surname projects. In fact, I just spoke on the previous speech here, and I had two people come up to me that, because I had mentioned my surnames in their talk, ancestral surnames, they came up to me and I told them, I go, you are welcome to join my surname project, because this is what it can do for you. Is even if you don't have the surname right now yourself, or you're female, or it's one of your other ancestral surnames that's not your present surname, you can still get matches on the autosomal DNA test back to about the 5th generation. So my great-grandmother is a Fuller, and we are brick-walled in the Isle of Wight. And her being a Fuller, and I have tested male Fuller cousins, it's still, the power of the test is to be able to see it within yourself. So in family tree DNA system, and only the project administrators can see this, but I did a screenshot of these and put them up on my project website, is this gal, she's a brick-walled Fuller in 1801, and mine goes back to the 1600s. Well, from DNA testing her brother, she knew that her Fuller line was related to mine. However, it was just fantastic that when we did the autosomal DNA test, we were able to see that we had that much DNA in common. Now, that's not very much, but it really does connect you to your ancestral surnames, and also can help lead to other matches. And then this story is a little more humorous. So there's a lady over there, Daryl Oakley-Teat, and I've been friends with her for many years now. I've met her through DNA testing, and we come to London every year for the Who Do You Think You Are conference. And sometimes, and I've done this myself, just so you know, because I'm a customer of family tree DNAs. I do not work for them, I volunteer for them. But I have tested over 40 relatives at their company because I've had so much success with it. And sometimes we project administrators can be a little lax at entering our information into the system. And so because they give us the ability, this is called a family autosomal DNA matrix, because they give us the ability to see these matches, which this is not publicly viewable. Every once in a while, what I do is I go into my projects and I go through all the names and I click to see if anybody in the project matches each other. Now, you can do this too on your system. You can look for matches, but sometimes it's something that you might not see or catch, which is exactly what happened with Daryl in this case, where the common ancestor might lie. So several years ago, I had set up a project for Lawrence County, South Carolina, because my father's father was born there, and I have 200 years of colonial early American ancestry from Lawrence County. And it's a geographical project. I take Y chromosome DNA, I take mtDNA, and then I started accepting the family finder results. And I have the surnames listed of families that are very common in Lawrence. So when Daryl had told me that she had Lawrence County ancestry, I asked her to join the project, and then Saxon was one of the common surnames in Lawrence County, so I had her, I had it listed, so this gentleman joined it. Well, one day I was going through the matrix and looking through, on all the names in there, seeing if I could see matches between the people in the project. And I got this hit on Daryl and George. And I was so excited because it's so rare that you actually get it with somebody you know. And so I went through and he had his surnames listed, but she did not. That's right. So I called her up on the phone. She lives in Florida. I live in California. I called her up on the phone and I said, Daryl, you do not have your surnames listed. Shame on you. So I sat there on the phone while she gave me all her surnames. Yes, I did this. And I went through it and I listed them myself. And we got a hit. And on a common surname. Turns out that I think it's their second cousins once removed. But what was really interesting is I told her, okay, you need to write to this man and find out how you're related. And then ask him permission if I can use this as a success story. So she did. So he writes back. She forwards me his email and I start reading it. And it says, he says, I was born and his age is the same as mine. And I thought, oh, that's unusual because I don't often find genealogists the same age as me. And then the next line was, and I live in Modesto, California. And why that's funny is because I live, 5 miles from Modesto, California. So I was just shocked. And so I asked her, if I could contact him. So I contacted him. He and I met at a Starbucks. And I took a picture of him and I sent it to her, and we exchanged genealogy. But that's one of the things that I wanted to really express to you at Point is to add your kids to projects. I mean, some surname administrators don't take autosomal results, but as it gains I do. As it gains in popularity, people will. And for all of the surnames, I have like Bolt, Fuller, Lyon, McCallum. I have Eastman. I take autosomal in all of those projects as well because I am very proactive about this and I look for matches like these because I want to help you get through those brick walls, and that's one of the instances with it. And then is my Bolt slide the next one? I hit this. Okay, so now my maiden name is Bolt, B-O-L-T. And most bolts are from Devon, and I'm so excited because we had a bolt test here. We have over in the ISOC stall, we have a list of surnames with sponsored tests where people like myself will pay for a test for that particular surname. So you might want to go check that out to see. But the bulk of all the surnames over there, and it says it at the top, are for Y chromosome tests for the male line. However, there is one for a family finder for the surname of Coverly. So Coverly, if you have that surname, you'll get a free test. But anyways, I have tested many of my Bolt cousins at Family Tree DNA. I have out to about a 6th to 7th cousin level over there. And they have in the system, this is what your page will look like. And you can drop down, this is called a threshold, the Sun Morgan threshold. So you can drop it down to different levels and it will show you how much DNA you have in common in varying amounts. The dark blue is me, I'm the dark blue, and then every name that I click on in the system are people that match me, and we all have ancestral DNA in common. Now, I often refer to this as Bolt DNA. However, the caveat here is it's not always Bolt. And the reason why is because you can inherit it from the Bolt's wife too. So for instance, my Robert Bolt, who was born in 1762, his wife, Margaret, is maiden name unknown. So some of this DNA could be in common with Margaret's line, but I just refer to it as Bolt out of convenience because I don't know what her maiden name is. I have a thought as to what I think it is. But the success story I wanted to share with you here is this gentleman right here, David Elkins. He matched this cousin of mine right here. This is my 4th cousin, Jared Gibson. He matched him on a mitochondrial DNA test. And both of them have ancestry from Lawrence County, South Carolina. Now, my Bolt that JR descends from, his wife was a Hubbs, Nancy Hubbs. And David's mitochondrial line is brick walled at a date later than my hub's ancestor. So it's more like the mid 1800s. But because they had both done the mitochondrial test and matched, I asked David to upgrade to an autosomal DNA test so that we could refine the match. And it turns out he actually has more than just one line from Lawrence County, so we still have to do what's called phasing. And this is actually a rudimentary kind of phasing. There's other ones that are much more complicated, and as time goes on, and the other thing too is that companies will eventually implement phasing. Anna's got her fingers crossed. The reason they haven't yet is because it takes a lot of computer processing power for them to implement the phasing, which means a lot of money. And we don't want them to raise the prices on tests. So we just want to wait until the technology advances and the cost of that comes down. But we can do rudimentary phasing right now. So on a rudimentary level, just to let you know, when you see areas that overlap on the chromosome, like say, for instance, see the yellow, the orange, and the blue, I know that that's DNA from those ancestors I have in common, whether it's the bolts or the hubs. That's the point. And the one that's yellow, he is my first cousin once removed. So that's why you see so much yellows, because on those sections of the chromosome, he shares many more ancestors in common with me. He's my father's first cousin. He was born in 1920, and he just passed away a year ago. I just adored him. In fact, he was a World War II mighty 8th Air Force pilot stationed in Chelverton, England. And one day he was I'm going to deviate a little bit and tell the story. He was walking along, and he saw a man slumped over his Jeep. And he and another soldier, and this was here in England, he and another soldier got the man and carried him in, and the man was Glenn Miller. You know yes. I mean, I've had an interesting story that carried Glenn Miller before he went missing in there. But anyways, my cousin, I refer to him as silver platter DNA. And the reason why is because with him being born in 1920, he's much closer to our common ancestor than I am. He's my father's first cousin, but he's one generation closer than I am. And also because we have very long generation links in our family. Our average birth age is between 35 to 40 years. My father's 43 when I was born. But where this is bad is that you don't really get to know your grandparents because they're deceased, sometime in your lifetime. However, from a DNA level, it's very advantageous because there's less generations to the common ancestor. So when you do this kind of testing, you want to test yourself and as many cousins as you possibly can, just as I have, because the more that test, and many of my cousins here paid for these tests. I didn't have to put the bill on all of these. But the more cousins you test, the more likely you are to have a success. And the reason why is because you don't all inherit the same amounts of DNA from your ancestors. So, even though you inherit 50% from your mother and 50% from your father, on an ancestral level, you might get 30% from your father and 70% from your mother. The way that I usually explain it to people to simplify it is, when you see siblings where one sibling will look more like the mother and the other looks more like the father, some siblings look like a 50-50 split in each parent. That's kind of how you can understand too that you're not inheriting the exact same DNA. But so with this, it needs to be phased more, but with each match that comes in, you can download the raw data. Let's see, there it is, download to Excel, and create a spreadsheet and track the numbers to the ancestors of your matches, and that's phasing. It's very tedious to do right now, but it can be done, and eventually, like I said, the companies will make it easier. They do have GenMatch, correct? They do have a online database called GenMatch that you can upload your results to that are, pardon? Data pipes, yeah. So on GenMatch, it's a free database that you can upload your results from any company to and get matches across companies and use it for phasing that way, and you upload a GenCom. But DataPike also has a utility too that you don't have to upload to, and you can find matches that way. So we can teach you more about it, but I just wanted to give you a basic overview because we have to wrap this up, but thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. And now we will take any questions. If you have any questions about autosomal DNA or how you could apply the test in your own family tree, then please ask us those questions and we'll attempt to have a little panel discussion. So do we have any questions to kick off with? Or is that all clear as well?
How much does the test cost?
$99, and here is going to be £80.
60.
£60 for the family finder test, so £60. Yep, question here.
Somebody mentioned that if you have cousins marrying, that kind of skews the effect and brings you back further. Is that actually helpful or unhelpful in trying to break through those brick walls? In other words, are you trying, is the common ancestor going to be so far back that maybe you won't find them, or does it give you a stronger indication of who it might be?
Given geological vectors, there's always going to be brick walls, and there's always going to be a situation where you cannot find that common ancestor. But when you have cousins who marry cousins, you can actually go back more generations. For instance, I am missing 2 different great-grandparents because they were, or great-great-grandparents, because my grandparents or great-grandparents were cousins. Therefore, I inherited more DNA from those 2. And then again, as it goes back, and I said that there were other cousins that married cousins. So if you push it back, I've actually found 9 cousins on those particular lines, which gets me back to middle to early 1700s. So that's an advantage there. So I don't see it as a disadvantage because you also have less genealogical names to track.
It could be a disadvantage from the point of view of Irish family history research. The reason being that most Irish family trees, my own included, we have a brick wall around about 1800 with half of my great-great-great-grandfathers in 1835, but the other half of my ancestors, great-great-grandparents. So if you get cousins marrying each other, then the relationship is further back. It appears closer than it actually is because there's this persistence of DNA in the system, and it's pushing your connection back further beyond the brick wall. And really what you want to do is you want to find somebody that is maybe just at the brick wall or 1 generation beyond it, because that gives you, that maximizes the chances of you actually being able to detect who the person is on the other side of the brick wall. So it can be a bit of a problem with Irish research.
Yeah, you're always going to have the paper trail problem.
My answer to it would be like Maurice is, it's more unhelpful. And besides, along with Irish populations, Ashkenazi Jews also tend to marry within other Ashkenazi Jews, so they have a lot of, many of them have brick walls from having so much DNA in common that it looks like they're more closely related than they actually are. However, David Pike, as Emily mentioned earlier, he has a tool because he has a cousin marriage too within his family tree that he wrote a program to help sort that out. It's got a big long name, but I can tell you about it afterwards because give you more information on it, but to help sort that out. It looks for stretches of homozygosity, but to be able to parse it out anyways, but most of the time it's unhelpful. Right?
Plus, you can't do anything about it. It's already happened.
I've got 7 great-grandparents from British Isles, and one mystery man, I think, is African American. Will autosomal DNA testing help you determine whether that's true or not?
Yeah, there is a matrix that you get, a bar graph or a circle graph, and if you have ancestors of specific populations, it will show up as a piece. However, if you know that this, of course, that more recently, the bigger the chance is, but perhaps if that culture or that population group does not show up, it doesn't mean you aren't if you know in your family. It just means that you probably inherited less DNA to fit the threshold. But if it's a more recent generation, the likelihood is high that it will show up as X number % of African in your case.
I agree with Emily. one of the examples I use a lot for what you're asking is Pocahontas, because many Americans can claim descent to Pocahontas, but if they only have this one Native American in their tree, I tend to describe it as, you know, when you're baking and you add vanilla to, say, a batch of cookie mix, and the more you stir the vanilla in, the more it disappears. It's the same way with the DNA. So the farther back the ancestor, and when the DNA from other populations that come in at each generation mix, or it's called recombine, it can like squish it out to where you won't be able to see it. So like I have a chart over here too if you'd like to see it, what you talk about in populations where it shows my brother 100% European, and myself I have called a pie slice of Jewish, but my brother didn't get that. Usually if it's within the last 5 generations, which can range between, say, the 1700s, many Americans have matches back to the 1600s. With my silver platter DNA cousin that was in World War II, he has a ton of matches in the 1600s. That's why I highly recommend testing the oldest generation that you can, because for every successive one, it'll recombine out. But it is possible. There's a gentleman named Tim Jansen, and he does a lot of work too with the adoptees and with phasing. And Tim has a Native American ancestor, but this is a rare case. It's possible, but it's rare. Of a Native American ancestor that lived about the same time as Pocahontas, and it does show up in his DNA.
It does happen.
And if you have 7 great grandparents who are European and one who's African American. Therefore, you should have approximately 12.5% of your DNA will have been inherited from that particular African American great-grandfather. He, in turn, and just looking at the average amount of DNA in the average ethnic mix of an African American, about 25%, I think, of African Americans will have European DNA, and the remainder, 75% of their DNA will be of African origin. So that 12.5% that you share, 25% of that will be of European origin, and 75% of the 12.5% will be of African origin. And that should be enough to show up in your ethnic admix pie chart. If it's not there, don't lose heart. If you tested your brother, you might find that he inherited the African part of the DNA that you have, and that you might have just, luck of the draw, inherited most of the European. So it's worthwhile testing yourself first, and if you're still not completely convinced, then test maybe one of your close relatives.
Can I ask, as well as being specific things to do with adoptees, is there any section that deals with abandoned babies?
Abandoned babies. Well, no, abandoned babies, I suppose, would be the same kind of category as adoptees or illegitimate births. I think we all have them in our family trees. I know in my own family tree there are 2 illegitimacies. And we're trying to find, they go back 100 years or so, but we're still trying to find out the descendants so we can actually make that connection. Have you seen the movie Philomena? Okay, absolutely fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, then that's absolutely, you should do. But one of the things that really interests me is to what extent we could have helped people like Philomena if herself and her son had been DNA tested. So rather than going through the whole rigmarole of searching and trying to get through the deceit and the lies and the secrecy, if she had her DNA in the database and her son had tested already previously, he might have tested 5 years previously, she would just have had to take the test. And then within 6 weeks she would have had a match that says there is somebody in the database that is your son or your daughter, according to the calculation. So it could be really helpful. So that's where the abandoned babies would fit into.
And I just want to clarify, the term that sometimes we use as adoption or illegitimacy really is basically standing for the fact that you don't know biological parents or grandparents, where there's been a name change. There's many, many reasons. And even DNAadoption.com can help in some of these ways. So it isn't necessarily that you have to look for your parents. It could be a grandparent that you don't know. And it could be that it's not an illegitimacy or adoption, but just a name change. So, open up the door a little bit wider, and many, many things will fit in.
And the other reason for really mentioning DNA adoption is because when you think about it, what is your brick wall but exactly the same as somebody who's been adopted? Someone who's been adopted, they don't know who their parents are. When you reach a brick wall, you don't know who the parents are beyond that brick wall. So that's why the techniques and methodology that have been developed by the DNA adoption community in the US for adoptees could actually be very, very useful for every single person here dealing with brick walls in their own family trees.
Any other questions?
We could sit here for hours, couldn't we? Well, there's other lectures to go and see, but I'd like to thank you all very much for your very kind attention, and I'd like to thank my co-presenters, Emily Aulicino and Catherine Borges. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now that I'm here to actually give a talk on what to do, which was so looking forward to. No, I mean,
if you Google David Craig and homes like Aulicino furniture, you should find it on more structural outreach marriage industry and how to help sort it out. Just like probably definitely America. Maybe it was so some places. Thanks, guys.
Don't make up. This.
And you can try that. Some admins are receptive to it, some aren't. It's still kind of new for them, especially meetings are great. However, they allow you to do private family projects too. In fact, I have a private ex project that I add all my people can't see it on the website, they can't join it. Like your husband and kids have to be added manually too. So you would like it.
No, you just there's always a lot going on. And asking. It's possible that.
Yeah, like that quarterly project I mentioned is a private family project. And they also don't explain the results. The annoying part is, and where it's a benefit if you can get the surname administrator on board, where it's a benefit is, like, for instance, I have one of my daily projects on Easter. And so I have he's in there, my wife's with him, and all these other Easter brands. But I also have one that's joined to the Easter ancestry. That's his. White chromosome doesn't show up. That's on the page of the family tree and people think it's non-matching Easter. So I have a family member section. But the thing about being in the same project is that when those people upgrade the family member, it's still you can see the very great admin. My recommendation for you is to set up a private project. Where are you from? Oh, okay.
Okay, so when you find the one that you
Contact info if you're ready.
I'll be fine. When you find the one, I didn't want to have to get lucky.
I'm a cousin of the two Borges. We had already had a two too.
Versus maybe one of the others.
Jane, nice to meet you. So you might know some Eastern groups. I have already Eastern support, not just Dayton. And he's pretty cool. But Canadian is they all seem to descend from the same line that Roger Eastman. That's really that helps America, so I don't know if they have the Eastmans in America. Yeah, we're stuck there. Maybe if they have the Canadian Eastmans, that helps sort it out. But the Hong Kong is somewhere. What I love about that so he's so much
One of the others.
Actually, Can I borrow your pencil? I talked to Jane about it. Did you make those?
It's the third cousin or fourth cousin or whatever. But if he's the one that relates to both the husband and wife that was in the then anyone else who tends of these descendants.
Do you know it? Okay. Where did you test? Did you test over the internet or the conference? Yeah, that'd be great. So, is all the residents You too. You haven't said any words like oops or whoops or like the Canadian.
Oh, I can say some years ago.
You do. You sound very American. Where?
Maybe something in the family or history.
Sorry. I've not been to Canada yet.
Oh, awesome. That's
They were describing Canadians as our the normal cousins that live in the apartment with the crack addict Americans. Because they work with a lot of food.
At the time, I will talk a little bit more about some of the details, but for now, I want to simplify the picture to just the backbone of this tree, where you have the M269, and then a clade underneath it defined by P311. And then if we have time, we'll get into some of these sub-branches beyond that. Just taking that simple tree and color-coding the pie charts, this is what the pattern looks like across Europe. Notice that the white areas indicate no R1b at all, and as you move towards the west, you have upwards of over 80% of the Irishmen having this R1b lineage. And then the different